And now on to Triple R Ride Region Radio. It's just after 11 o'clock. I'm Maggie Mason with Arts and Tarts through to 12. And as I had mentioned earlier, I've got a special guest today. It was about 2 years ago when I met, and again, it's Luccio, of course, isn't it?
That's right.
Yes. When I met Marco Luccio at the wonderful Australian Galleries in Paddington, and I just could not believe the detail on his works. He had gone to New York and he had done these iconic buildings like the Statue of Liberty. And anyway, tell the listeners about that other show, Marco, and welcome again. Welcome again to Arts and Tarts.
Thanks, Maggie, and hi to everyone. That first show was, the first focus on New York started about 3 years ago. And my wife, Deborah, and I, Deborah's also an artist, and she was doing the New York City Ballet, and I was going onto rooftops around New York. And I took 40 sheets of copper with me and had little copper mules who were delivering them to me, and they could stay with us as long as they brought copper with them. And I took them on top of rooftops and around New York and scratched them directly onto the copper plates. And then back in Melbourne, 3 months later, I started to ink them up to see what I had on them. So you don't really know what you get until you start inking them up. Mm. And that was probably about the biggest show I'd had, actually. Sort of 85 images in the end, 40 dry points, and the rest were paintings and drawings. And so New York has been a huge inspiration since then, and we've made 3 trips to New York, and the idea is to go there as often as possible because it just invigorates so much and inspires so much. And it was during that trip of focusing on the cityscapes that I discovered Athena in the Metropolitan Museum.
Yes, the famous sort of image of the head of
that's right.
The goddess. Do you want to tell the listeners a bit about the goddess's historical background if they've forgotten?
Well, it was really interesting because Claudia Chan Shaw, who opened the exhibition, talked about me having an affair with a mistress, and her name was Athena. And so Athena is the goddess of art and civilization, and she can be pretty fiery as well. So she kind of looks after other gods, and she's unique because she was the only god that was actually born from Zeus's head, if you like. She kind of exploded from his head, and so she had a lot of power, more power than other gods, and
so the legend goes.
So the legend goes.
Yes.
We don't really know for sure, do we? But she had a wonderful profile. Her face was just beautiful and strong, and she wasn't beautiful in the, I guess, the way we see women today. But as far as a piece of sculpture goes, she had a very dynamic form. And I've always been a big fan of Picasso's work, and you could really see where Picasso was influenced in his own work, all those neoclassical images he made, all those paintings of the Three Graces and what have you. Mm. And so while I was at the Met, I was really interested in seeing if I could somehow get closer to his work as well. So Athena became the focus for this show. Athena and some of the other statues and things at the Metropolitan Museum. But they're not done in a really classical style. They're not really meticulously drawn classical images, I guess, the way I've done them. I'm hoping that people get a picture of what they may be, and that is that, they're really kind of graphically, hopefully they're really strong in a graphic way. So they're very linear, they're very sort of scratched really deeply onto the copper. Mm-hmm. So I've really gouged deeply into the copper to really bring out the sculptural elements of Athena and the other gods, so that the work has a real grittiness to it. And, the work's been pushed through layers and layers of overprinting. So
yes, well, that's what I thought we'd talk about.
Yep, sure.
With the listeners of describing as a contrast to the other exhibition, you know, how you did this, because the other exhibition you would see these wonderful works from 2 years ago, and I've still got such images in my mind of those iconic New York streetscapes and buildings. But whereas that was when I say straight, that was I use the idea of the Leonardo da Vinci or something. Your technique was just so stunning in itself that it was, there was no doubt that you were a visual artist, as in you could put an image onto paper or onto whatever. So that was, what I'll call a sort of a straight type of experience. Yes. Now with this, you have got very different sort of, I won't say fragmented exactly, but you've got layering in these images, and you've built them up from different impressions. So do you want to tell the listeners of 2RRR the difference between, that exhibition where you were sort of being a straight artist, as it were, to this where you have drawn on various impulses, and then we'll later on go on and talk about the mixed media postcards and so on. But first of all, about this.
Absolutely. The word fragmented is actually really, really good, because I've actually described some of the work in that way. And the first series of Cityscapes of New York was really about, I stood there in front of Grand Central, for instance, and on the corner of Vanderbilt and Grand Central, and carved into the copper. And I was really trying to capture the energy of a city, the grittiness of a city, that kind of amazing experience in New York. So it was a little bit more literal, if you like capturing the city. And so with this show, I didn't want to repeat that. I wanted to do something different. And so I was bringing in other symbols of civilization, and trying to impress onto large sheets of paper multiple images that were overlaid and fragmented, as you say. So, for instance, one of the images has lots and lots of different copper plates. So some of them have been through the press 20 to 30 times. So,
amazing, yes.
So with the New York ones, for instance, it was one image, one sort of panorama of New York. And to work as an artist on one image and to try to go from start to finish, that was interesting and that was fantastic and lots of fun. But with this show, I had lots of other challenges. And so by combining images of, say, Athena with some of Picasso's paintings in the background, and then overlaying it with images of strongmen from the 20s. And in fact, I found a whole heap of plates in an old antique place, and they were images of women and classical images that an unknown person, I don't know who that person was, but he actually had carved these plates for his wife. And I thought that would be an interesting layer to add to it as well. And so I would scratch onto the copper, onto a plate, working with maybe 20 to 30 different plates in one time, as opposed to the Cityscapes in New York. It was one plate at a time, start to finish. Here I had 20, 30 different images, and I was sort of collating them onto the paper. So you print one image, you run it through the press, and then you might print over the same piece of paper again, and you might do that 20 to 30 times until you've embedded the image with lots and lots of layers. And with this show, it's
and really, it gives such a richness, I must say, when you look at it. Instead of it's being thin or one-dimensional, you get this feeling of a sort of a blurring, or in the proper sense of the word, you're blurring as in a complementary blurring.
Yes.
I mean, you can't take it all. You can't take it all in one go, in one viewing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm hoping that's what you get from it, and the idea of sometimes people, on opening night, a lot of the conversations I had were about people interpreting the works. And I guess with the Cityscapes in New York, there were certain interpretations that could be made, and people had different opinions. But with this show, it's amazing how much people read into it. So John Hughes, the writer here, quite an award-winning Australian writer, sent me an email shortly after the opening and discussed the fact that, the piece he really loved was about Athena, who looked like she was embedded in the earth, and the colours that I had chosen for that particular piece. He read all these wonderful stories within it. And then another person had emailed me saying that what they read into it was a very maternal sort of feeling about, people bring their own personal stories to it. And I think this show in particular allows for more personal interpretation. And even my own stories are locked within these classical images, so I was able to put some of my own personal things into the work. And so the idea of having the fragments and not just one image was to be able to tell more stories and to include more things. And also this show has a lot more colour. There's paint. There's I've painted over some of the images and then reprinted over the top. So I'm kind of not sticking to the classic, even though it's a classical theme. I'm not sticking to classical ways of printmaking, and I'm trying to blur. And that was great that you used the word blur, because really this for me is a show about blurring printmaking and painting. And really making a mess on the paper, and then bringing an image out from that mess, and then maybe destroying it again, and then bringing it back. And so over time you get these layers, and hopefully there's a sense of embedding time and space in there, and history, and my own history. And really connecting the past with the present, and dealing with images that symbolise civilization, in an indirect way, rather than, say, for me, I've been trying to do that with the cityscapes. This was just, or maybe even more of a direct way, saying, okay, Athena is almost like a logo for civilization because she's so graphic. She looks like she could be on a coin.
Yes.
And she's such a graphic image. And for me, it's really given birth to a whole new way of making work, a whole new process. And it's really invigorating. And